Before my journey into the world of dietetics and nutrition, I was on a path for something else entirely. When I first came to Michigan State, I had one sole goal, and that was to be accepted into the School of Education. I worked tirelessly to get accepted, and eventually I did, in which I later declined to join the dietetics program. However, I vividly remember one important class that I took, and it was an introductory course my second semester. This course His whole topic was involving racism and specifically tackling white privilege and how to recognize, approach, and dismantle white privilege and racism in the school system. This was a topic that I had very little experience in and delving into, and so, while it was not so challenging academically, it was challenging personally. The course was taught by a very successful and proud woman of color who sought to teach us her experiences, both personally and professionally, with racism in the classroom. For one of our final essays, we were required to do a critical assessment on white privilege. I just remember ending my paper with something that I thought was groundbreaking. This idea of color blindness and not seeing color and thinking that that was enough to combat racism. If not, I was hoping maybe I might label myself as someone who was not racist and therefore all would be, well, fine. It wasn't until later that the instructor of the course pulled me aside and asked to have a discussion about my final paper. She explained to me that the idea of being colorblind really does not combat racism at all, and in actuality it means that you're failing to see race and failing to see that racism does exist. And it also means that you might be falling into a pattern known as racist passivity. By choosing not to see color, you are choosing not to see the reality that is ever present in our society, and that's that racism is real. Hi, my name is Becca Ray, and today I will be talking about the book How to Be an Anti-Racist, written by Dr. Ibram X. Kendi. Dr. Kendi discusses a powerful concept called anti-racism, and how to transition from racist ideologies to anti-racist ideologies. To do this, he takes the reader through his own journey of being someone who was a racist and his transition to becoming an anti-racist. The good news is this: both racist and anti-racist ideologies are not fixed identities. The anti-racist movement is always ongoing and requires that individuals address and understand racist concepts. This book reminds us what we subconsciously already know: how to be a racist, how to pretend to not be a racist, and the ultimate goal, how to be an anti-racist. The first main point I'd like to touch on about this book today is defining racism versus anti-racism. But to understand racism, we must first understand race. Dr. Kendi explains that race is not based in biology. In fact, there is no one gene that determines a race or a way to measure it. There is, however, ethnicity, which is commonly used interchangeably for the word race. Ethnicity is one's person's heritage as part of a cultural or national group. Typically, this refers to their ancestors and therefore their genetics. Race is often viewed as a grouping of people who share similar ethnicities, however, this is far from true. Race is actually a social concept that merges different groups of people into one very broad racial category. In fact, race, in essence, is just a social construct that was used and created to maintain power, as explained by Dr. Kendi. The earliest example of this is a man who goes by the name of Gomez de Zurara. Gomez de Zurara declared all people from Africa were subhuman animals who lacked reason and morality. He did this to justify this brand new idea called slave trading, which was brought to him by Prince Henry the Navigator. In order to understand race, we must also understand inequity. Inequity means two different groups do not have equal standing in various aspects of life, especially when they are divided by race. This comes as a result from governmental and institutional policies. This idea is how racism works and continues to work today. Policies that create inequities among racial groups and ultimately end up taking on a life of their own due to the normalization and acceptance of these inequities is what causes racism to grow and expand and continue today. However, we should really first start by defining what a racist is and what an anti-racist is. A racist is one who supports a racist policy through their actions or inaction, or expresses a racist idea. Whereas an anti-racist is one who supports an anti-racist policy through their actions or expressing an anti-racist idea. Dr. Kendi explains that being an anti-racist is just this simple. It's supporting anti-racist policies and expressing anti-racist ideas. In the end, anyone can overcome their own racism and become an anti-racist. However, it is impossible to label yourself as a not racist person. You are either a racist or you are an anti-racist. I'd like to end this part of that presentation by using a quote. What's the problem with being not racist? It is a claim that signifies neutrality. I am not a racist, but neither am I aggressively against racism. The next portion of this presentation focuses on activism and how that leads to social transformation. A true anti-racist must focus on bringing people into an inclusive, diverse, activist environment. An activist is one who campaigns to bring about political or societal change. And this ultimately will lead to societal transformation when combined with policy change. To be an anti-racist means that we have to build political power and implement anti-racist policies to create equity. Therefore, an anti-racist is someone who focuses on policy change, not just ideas. Activists need to be patient and open-minded if they want to persuade others to join their movement. Think about the difference between a demonstration and a protest. A demonstration raises awareness, but it does little to bring about political change, whereas a protest is a long-term campaign that builds power to create policy change. Nobody becomes an activist just by personal change. Dr. Kendi asks that people are genuinely committed to becoming an anti-racist by joining a movement, or by holding their peers accountable, or using whatever power they do have in their society to fight for racial equity in all aspects of their lives. By doing this, racism in society will slowly become dismantled and racial equity can be achieved. The last topic I'd like to discuss today is intersectionality. Intersectionality is how different kinds of inequities, such as racism, sexism, and classism, intersect to produce more complex forms of oppression. Dr. Kendi goes into further detail on such inequities, including sexism, classism, and genderism. When paired with racism, these other inequities further oppress the individual. He gives the example of this. A poor black woman and a rich black man are going to experience different forms of oppression based on both their race and their class. Therefore, lumping all people together means that we're truly failing to understand their differences. So to truly be an anti-racist means that we are against one form of ism or inequity, and we collaborate with movements against other forms of inequities. Much like we've learned in our own class content this semester, understanding yourself and the ways in which we communicate and operate can have a large impact on our intended audience. As future dietitians, it's important that we understand what, if any, our own prejudices are, and that way we can find ways to fight these forms of prejudice to provide the best level of care that we can. To be an anti-racist means that we want to improve all social movements by showing that nobody is completely powerless and nobody is above accountability. Everyone is responsible for promoting the solidarity and inclusion of all. In his book, Dr. Kendi uses an example of his own past homophobic ideologies to explain another step in his transition to becoming an anti-racist. Dr. Kendi had learned that one of his closest friends was gay. Using the idea of intersectionality, Dr. Kendi knew that he either had to choose between his friend or his homophobia. Ultimately, Dr. Kendi knew that he could not be an anti-racist if he was homophobic. Therefore, to be an anti-racist means that you understand that you have privileges and there also exist disadvantages to how you identify, how you present yourself, and your sexuality. To be an anti-racist means that you serve as an ally to all people, and you must listen, learn, and lead by equalizing ideas and other people's ideas of policy campaigns. Dr. Kendi's book continues to explore racism rooted in other ideas such as biology, ethnicity, body, culture, behavior, color, space, and class, and I encourage you to read his body of work to educate yourself on these important topics and their intersectionality with racism. In the ending of Dr. Kendi's book, he reveals something truly powerful. Far be it from me to ruin the ending for anybody who's interested in reading the book. However, Dr. Kendi uses a powerful metaphor that describes America's fight against racism. Anti-racists have to understand that the odds will always be against us. However, it is important to hold on to the compassion and hope. In his final passage in his book, Dr. Kendi uses this phrase: "Once we lose hope, we are guaranteed to lose. But if we ignore the odds and fight to create an anti-racist world, then we give humanity a chance to one day survive, a chance to live in communion, a chance to be forever free." Just like Dr. Kendi, I urge each and every one of you to challenge your own ideas surrounding race and racism. Much like my own naive thinking all those years ago in that classroom, it is not enough to simply not see color. It is not enough to say, "I'm not a racist." We as a society must fight harmful ideologies and movements that continue to promote racial inequity. We must all strive and learn how to become an anti-racist. Thank you.